Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, we're having coffee at Sondra's house for the Ask a Doc series at Empower Yoga, which is Sondra's studio. And I'm the doc in this case, which I always like to say I'm not a doctor. I'm certainly not an official medical doctor, but I have a physician's license in Germany. That's comparable to what the Oriental medicine specialists or the chiropractors in the US have. So of course, I'm not supposed to give any official medical advice here, but I can share a lot of my information from what I've learned so far and all the thousands of books that I've been reading. So today we're going to talk about food issues because who doesn't have any? I'm just going to quickly get into the presentation. I call myself a lapsed naturopath mostly because I got so discouraged with all the quackery that I've been seeing in the mid-90s when I was practicing in Germany. And of course, I also am a lapsed naturopath because here I don't have a license to practice medicine. That's a question for participants. You can just send me an email later. I would love to hear who you are, why you're interested in this video, and anything that you would want to hear about later on. This is a short overview of my bio. We don't have to get much into this because I would love to hear a little bit more from Sondra. Maybe you can share a bit about what you're doing.
So my style of eating is definitely grazing. I like to eat small meals all throughout the day, and it's something I've been doing for many years, starting from back in my bodybuilding days, many moons ago. And that's how you were trained, that you have to keep your metabolism going so you don't burn through muscle. And
right,
I like to eat, so it's stuck.
You have to keep adding fuel, right?
Yeah.
So that there is something to burn, and so that you don't get into this starvation, high emergency, cortisol levels rising through the roof states, right?
Exactly.
So that's the whole idea. And particularly for bodybuilders, of course, that makes sense. So that's what I often find when we're talking about bodybuilders who are vegans. In my opinion, they get away with it because they're just burning off all the starches they're eating. So maybe veganism is even better for people who are working out a ton than for most of us. And I mean, I had this tragic experience because of health issues that in 2016, I pretty much had to start eating meat, and it changed everything for me. So I wouldn't say it's amazing to eat meat, but when I was pretty much not allowed to eat anything else but meat and greens, it was kind of interesting to find out that I actually enjoyed the taste more than I thought I would after 20 years of not eating any. And my metabolism has responded really well. So I think you're a vegetarian too, right? Or you eat fish?
I eat fish occasionally, but it's, mainly vegetarian.
And with the grazing, don't you ever feel that it leads to overeating?
Oh yeah. I've watched myself eat, like half a block of cheese in a day because I did little slivers throughout the day, and then you realize at the end how much you actually ate.
Right. Yeah. And I think that used to be my problem too. And particularly when I had a time where I really developed a binge eating disorder. And I think, we all have like disordered eating experiences in this culture, almost all of us. I think nobody has really been spared. So if it's not overeating, then it's undereating or compulsive calorie checking. For a while, I think I was just compensating with just going for a run for every meal and all the craziness around that.
Yeah.
Anything you want to share?
I've gone through several eating disorders in my youth. Anorexia was my first one. I was overweight as a child and not knowing any better. I was like, well, I just need to stop eating. And for me, it's all or nothing. So I would eat, just enough to sustain myself.
Yeah.
And every diet, including with the bodybuilding, you kind of excuse obsessive behaviors. I would take my scale, and if it wasn't exactly the amount of ounces I was allowed for that protein or that starch.
Right.
It, like even 1 grain too many of the rice would
Oh
go
boy.
off of the plate.
Yeah.
But I was, for a bigger goal. So I always was able to rationalize the
Sure.
behavior as just healthy and getting stronger.
And I was just reading about a paper that got recently published about eating disorders in athletes, because it seems to be like a very common problem. And we all don't think of that. We think of athletes as being extremely healthy, right?
Yeah.
And what you're bringing up on the anorexia perspective, that is a huge problem when we're talking about intermittent fasting, because there are health benefits that we can't deny with extending the hours when we're not consuming calories. And part of that is for the digestive tract, part of that is just to re-educate the metabolism. But there's also the tendency that people just excuse their anorexia by saying, oh, I'm doing intermittent fasting. So there are certain risks to it, and I don't want to deny that. So there are options in how we eat, and this is part of what this presentation is about, because it gets really confusing. I'm waiting for the slide to change, which for some, here we go. Well, these are a bunch of the books, and we're going to put those into the comments or wherever we're posting that. We're going to drop a copy. I recommend a few of those. I definitely recommend Jason Fung's books, like the Obesity Code and the Diabetes Code are excellent. Nina Teicholz is a journalist, so she's not a medical doctor like Jason Fung is, but she did a lot of research on fats in general, and that is fascinating and gives a good outlook and is written really well and easy to understand. Completely the opposite of deep nutrition, which is not particularly easy to understand. But if you really want to know the biochemistry and the physiology of nutrition, then this would be a great book. If you want to have something simple about a ketogenic diet, I really recommend Jimmy Moore's. When I picked that up, at first I thought, okay, that is so dumbed down, I don't want to touch it, but it actually has really good facts behind it. So that's going to be interesting, because a lot of people are experimenting with ketogenic diets without really knowing what that means. And on keto, you actually have to do the obsessive thing and weigh everything and check for the carb content and even check the blood levels, because otherwise you don't know whether you really are in ketosis. A lot of people are going to tell you, oh yeah, I'm on keto. And you see them eat so many sweet potatoes that this cannot be a ketogenic state, because they might be able to eat like half an ounce of that, and otherwise they're going to be kicked out of keto.
So what exactly does it mean to be in a ketogenic state? That's a very fad thing right now.
Yes, and that's exactly the problem, that a lot of people think they are, because they think they lowered their carbs. And for them, carbs are just the flour things like bread, or sugar things like ice cream, which I love. I'm glad there's some sugar-free ice cream out there. But they don't really think about starchy foods. For example, potatoes, even sweet potatoes, and then also squashes, zucchini. And then even if you eat broccoli, if you eat a lot of it, you're going to have so many carbs that you're not in the ketogenic state. And you don't have to be on keto either. For all I care, you can graze on broccoli all day long. So the thing is, a ketogenic state is when your body is making ketones. Ketones are something that the body can burn for energy. And a lot of us, when we've learned physiology, like in high school courses or in college, we learn about burning glucose, which is great, and the body likes it because it's relatively easy and it gives lots of energy. Ketones are built by the liver in order to burn fat. And it is a process that happens by this magic chemistry that the liver performs for us all day long, but the liver needs enzymes to do that. The liver is not going to produce those enzymes if you always have enough glucose around, because why should it? There's plenty to burn. We don't need to burn fat, right? And that's exactly the problem. a lot of people who are grazing always have glucose to burn, so they never burn the body fat that maybe they would want to get rid of. So that's why people get on ketogenic diets to force the body to start burning fat, just because there's not enough glucose available. But because for the body, that's a new thing, and the liver doesn't have enough of those enzymes available, it doesn't really like doing it. And at first, there are reactions that people call the keto flu. So you might hear that there's fatigue, there's sometimes just a feeling of nausea. There are a bunch of other symptoms that you can look up that can make that uncomfortable, particularly when people were very much reliant on glucose. So grazing is what we already mentioned. And for some people, this really helps against overeating because they never develop this intense hunger. So that can be a useful thing. For me, it never really worked. And particularly in times when I had more food issues, I would just eat small amounts all day long, and I would never feel when I'm hungry, and I would never feel full either, which I think is a huge problem if you don't have this sense of being sated, because I was forcing myself to eat small amounts, and then I always wanted more. And this idea of more could really get overpowering in my head, so that all I'm thinking about is food. I don't know how that's been for you.
I can forget about food.
That's great.
Long periods of time, yeah.
So that's why the grazing is working out for you, right?
Yeah. It keeps me on healthier foods.
Ah, that's good too.
Yeah. I notice if I don't graze, then I'm much more likely to find a bag of potato chips and just go nuts on it. Where if I've grazed all day, I might actually just take, a small handful and be done with it, just bored with the potato chips.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have this typical addictive personality where when I start, I don't want to stop. And it depends on my psychological state. I mean, I've noticed that recently that I'm doing much better than I did a couple of years ago. I am able to put things away. I'm able to have some of the sugar-free ice cream and not the whole pint. And it's like a great experience because it feels like personal success. Or I can open a bag of nuts and not eat the whole bag. And there were times when it was really impossible. And so I feel eager to share this just to normalize it, because a lot of people feel like, why don't I have the willpower? What is wrong with me? But overeating is totally normal. We have not adapted as human beings to deal with this overabundance of food. We have pretty much evolved to eat everything there is. So we really need to figure out behaviors that distract us from the idea of eating more. Has that been what you're doing? Do you feel like sometimes you distract yourself consciously, or are you just easily satisfied?
No, it definitely takes mindful work. Yeah. I can go into a binge of overeating if I don't pay attention to.
Yeah. Do you get hangry? Do you notice when your blood sugar drops?
Oh, yeah. Everybody notices when my blood sugar drops too much.
And that's a typical thing why some people like to get on keto or like to do intermittent fasting. Because as soon as the body knows how to build ketones, well, most of us always have enough fat available, right? So then we're not so dependent on eating all the time, and we can go long amounts of time without getting into that hangry state, because the brain just starts burning ketones instead of the glucose, and everything is fine. Everything is nicely at the same level. And we're relying on glucose. We often get like this, oh, I just ate, everything is great, boom, now I crash, I lose all the energy, I'm kind of a little touchy, things annoy me. And that's really the brain being starved for glucose. So I was talking to people at the Translational Research Institute for Metabolism and Diabetes, because I got an introduction from all the local networking I've been doing here in Orlando. And I was able to go and visit and talk to one of the researchers. She does these really cool things of sticking people into a completely sealed chamber so they can measure not only what goes in, what goes out, how much energy is burned, but also to really observe the gases the body is releasing, the CO2 content, the oxygen content. So that is like the best way to really see how people's metabolism are working. And I wanted to know from her, is it a good idea to graze? Is it a good idea to fast? Or is it a good idea to get on keto? What should the body really be burning? Should we be living on glucose or should we be living on fats? And I found it very interesting because she said, the most important thing is being adaptable. So we should be able to use energy from all the sources we have available. And the best thing about the grazing really happens when people are smart about it and they're eating a lot of whole foods. So that means none of the refined sugars and flours. If you have bread out of white flour, that pretty much becomes sugar already if you're chewing it long enough. So those are the things that really raise the blood sugar very fast. And that's where it gets dangerous because that can lead to diabetes in the long run. But people who are grazing on good foods are perfectly healthy. The problem is that if there aren't long enough fasting times, and usually we're starting to talk about intermittent fasting when it's like 12 hours. If we don't have that, then we're relying so much on glucose that we can't really use fat for fuel. So it is a good idea to just occasionally extend the time a little bit. Because like the researcher was saying, it's important to use energy from all the sources, including fat. So over time, when people eat nothing but starchy foods and they don't fast long enough over several decades, their body really doesn't know how to use fat anymore. And then it can happen that people who want to lose weight are suddenly totally unable. When people want to try to get on longer fasting times and they feel like the hangriness is totally making it impossible, or they really start feeling bad symptoms of low blood sugar, they might want to do keto first. And that really was what worked for me because I was getting terrible headaches when I was fasting for too long. So even just going over 12 hours would throw me into these low blood sugar migraine-like states. And so I always thought I just can't fast at all. But after being on keto for a few weeks, just having the ketogenic diet got my body into burning fat naturally. And after that, the fasting was not a problem. So that is something to keep in mind, even for people who don't want to be on a ketogenic diet long-term. They can use keto for a short time to make it possible to fast if they want to get into intermittent fasting for all kinds of reasons. For me, the fasting has been working really well just because it makes it easy for me to forget about eating. If I know my eating time today is over anyway, then this nagging question doesn't show up in my head, which makes my life much easier because then I don't have to worry. Can I eat something? What can I eat? Is there something that I want to eat? What do I want to eat? It's just over. What do you feel like? What have you been noticing when you are fasting for longer? Do you feel like you tend to overeat afterwards? Is that why you stick to the grazing?
I just don't like fasting.
Yeah.
I've done it. I've done several different cleanses and just styles of fasting, and I just don't like it.
Yeah.
I like food. I want to be able to eat, even if it's a tiny little bit. It's much more satisfying for me to have that small bit of whatever than have nothing for a longer period of time.
And it sounds for me like the portion control is not the big problem for you like it is for me.
No.
Because it's like when I want to eat a lot, which is why for me, the intermittent fasting is great. And I like to have like 20 hours of fasting time.
Yeah. I can't overeat too much, even if I try. There's a point where I just start feeling sick and it comes very quickly. So it might be a cup of rice. A cup of rice will make me feel like I just binge ate at a, buffet for hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously for you, the grazing works really well. If you're interested in trying some intermittent fasting, don't overdo it. Question your motivations, because if you're already skinny, there's no reason for you to try to lose more weight. And then you have to really make sure that in the time when you're eating, you're really consuming enough calories. So that can become difficult for people who are already underweight. But if you are mildly overweight and you just want to make sure that you don't get into snacking late at night, I think the easiest start is to just make sure that after dinner, it's really over and there's no snacking. For a lot of people, that works if they just brush and floss thoroughly their teeth, because then they have like this mental idea of this is over. Check whether you might have a problem burning fat. The more you're hungry in the morning, even when you had dinner in the evening, the more you might rely on glucose only. And then it would really make sense to get on keto for a short time, just to get your body into this fat burning metabolism faster than if you were only fasting and you always have to deal with these willpower problems. Because on keto, you can almost graze. It's just like all fatty foods and very little carbs. And that makes it easier for people who have that hangriness. Last words, Sondra, before we sign off.
I'll give a few of my tips that I use for grazing healthily. Is I prepare a lot of my food in advance, and I don't use the obsessive measuring everything out, but I will make a whole big thing of like a quiche and cut it up into estimated portions, and just have a lot of healthy food pre-cut and pre-prepared. And that helps to have flexibility, but still have ready grab and go snacks.
That's what it always comes down to, prepping.
Yeah, especially, in a normal world where I'm running from the studio to 100 different things, I always have things I can easily grab and go and not get tempted for the fast food and the other things that might not be healthy grazing.
And this is super important to me too, because I noticed that when I've been running around and there's a lot going on, and then I come home and it's like, now I can eat, I tend to just grab whatever is there. And while I'm cooking real food, I just eat like a bunch of nuts, and then, boom, I burst through the calorie count for the day without even counting it. But the scale is going to tell me later. So that has happened very often. And that really taught me, okay, I have to be prepared. There has to be good food when I come home. Yeah. So prepping, it's all about prepping. And that can be easy. And I know that on your pages for Empower Yoga, you often share prepping tips. So that's a good thing to follow too. We're going to drop this into the comments. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It was fun.
It was.
I love hanging out here. I love seeing my painting in the background. It lives at Sondra's house now because I don't have a proper place for it. So thanks a lot.